All right, and so as mentioned, we are going to be posting this on Facebook and our YouTube channel. So this note is more for people that are not here right now viewing this course. Anybody else that is viewing this is made intentionally to be chaplain-led. So you need to be in communication with a chaplain as you're doing the course. If you're just viewing it on our Facebook page or YouTube channel, we just want you to understand this does not qualify for the PQS. And if you would like to actually become a religious lay leader, to please get a hold of your chaplain, and they can go through all the necessary steps in order to make this qualify as your PQS standards. So our agenda for today is we're going to start with a little introduction into what the Religious Lay Leader program is, what you will be doing. We'll go over a review of this document right here, which is kind of the be-all, say-all. It's a NTTP 1-Tech 05.01 mic, and that's going to be both the United States Marine Corps and the U.S. Navy standard on religious lay leaders. We'll go into what the Command Religious program is and what religious lay leaders are and do, and then we'll go into the training standards. At that point, Chaplain Reedy will take over, and he'll go through those different lessons with you, kind of get into the meat of it. And at the end, I'll come back in and tell you about the next steps, the checklists and expectations that you need to complete, the references required, and then we can take any extra questions, any saved rounds at that point once we've gone through everything. All right, so kind of an introduction to the history and the purpose of the Religious Lay Leader program. In July 1952, Admiral Radford, the Commander-in-Chief U.S. PAC Fleet, issued a guide for religious worship and character development in U.S. ships without a chaplain. This was the first official guidance published for religious lay leaders. Because commanders are required to provide a CRP, which is a Command Religious program, which accommodates the needs, preferences, and rights of all authorized personnel, religious lay leaders perform an important role to account for the religious diversity within the command. This is really important, and why you guys are really important as religious lay leaders is because in the Navy, we serve all Navy personnel, all Coast Guard personnel, all Marine Corps personnel, as well as all their dependents. With all those people, I think we have about 750,000 people that we are serving when we count all the dependents and everybody in, and we only have about, I think, 850 chaplains. Among that, only, I believe, 8 right now are Jewish chaplains. We have, I think, 1 imam. We have a couple of Buddhist priests, and I think maybe 40 Roman Catholic chaplains. And with that, it just shows that, yes, we have many flavors of the Christian denomination, but there are a lot of faith groups that our service members are going to be a part of that do not have official representation. So that's where religious lay leaders come in, is because as we can provide for our own faith group, we can't actually provide. We can facilitate for everyone else. And so you are going to help us to facilitate by taking care of the needs of sailors that don't have a chaplain of that particular faith group there for them. So it's very important, the role that you guys have. Another thing in this training that you may notice is we will have a lot of repetition. That is intentional, because with repetition comes retention, and we want to make sure that everybody really does absorb all this stuff. And so we're going to mention things multiple times. And again, we will have this online for you to view later too, so you can review the lessons. All right, so important acronyms to know. As I mentioned, CRP stands for the Command Religious Program. That is going to be everything within the command that has to do with any sort of faith-based practice. So that's going to be all religious services, any Bible studies, any sort of different sacraments, depending on what the different faith group is, anything that has to do with that, that's going to be part of the Command Religious program. The RMT is the religious ministry team. That's going to be your chaplains, your RPs, contracted professionals that assist with the Command Religious program, and the religious lay leaders. You will be part of that religious ministry team. RO is a religious organization, so that's going to be whoever it is that is sponsoring you to be a religious lay leader. So that is the church or the different faith background that you come from that's going to actually be submitting a letter saying this person is qualified to do this. They're in good standing with us. We would like them to represent us in the Navy. RPs are religious program specialists. They are going to be the enlisted rate that assists chaplains. They do so much. They're really jack of all trades. They are like a yeoman mixed with, I don't know, everything. So they actually, they do a lot of administrative work. When you are deployed, your chaplain actually relies on them for their defense, as chaplains are non-combatants. So there's a lot that they do. The ROF is a religious offertory fund. That's not going to be super important with religious lay leadership, because chances are you will not be taking an offering, which is an important thing to note. It's not very common. If there is any reason that you would be taking an ROF, then that's going to be really a chaplain that is over you that will be in charge of that. RLL, that's this, religious lay leader training. It's been specified to us that it's important to call it religious lay leader because as part of the command religious program, it does need to be somebody from a specific faith group, so you are a lay leader of a particular religious faith. And then RNA is a religious needs assessment. That is a survey that commands do that actually specify the need that we have for different faith groups in order to have religious lay leaders in place. So a little bit more on the command religious program. Each command's total collection of religious ministry and associated activities planned and executed within the command. So as I said, this is going to be anything that has to do with faith or religion as part of the command religious program. And we need to make sure that everything that's happening within the command is under that umbrella. Sometimes we will see that there are other things going on, and anything that is happening within the command doesn't need to be command sanctioned. So that's where it's important that the command religious program, the religious ministry team, is abreast of that, and so we can have a little bit of oversight in that. Not oversight to control what is happening, but just to make sure that it's happening in accordance with what standards are set up for the CRP. All religious ministry within the command shall be incorporated into the CRP. And Navy chaplains are the only personnel authorized to supervise command religious programs on behalf of the commanders. So as a religious lay leader, if you are out on a ship and there's not a chaplain on your ship, you're not actually in charge of the CRP, but you are a tool within the CRP. You're part of that religious ministry team, and you're functioning in an essential role to ensure that the command religious program is carried out as need be. So the RMT, again, a religious ministry team, composed of Navy chaplains, the RPs, contracted religious professionals, religious lay leaders, and then all other personnel who assist the CO in the discharge of the responsibilities regarding the CRP. So again, having a command religious program is a requirement by law, by instruction, and anybody that is assisting in that actually being carried out is going to be part of the religious ministry team. So your religious organization, your RO, it's going to be an authorized member of a religious lay leader's faith group who submits a document authorizing which religious functions the religious leader may or may not perform, as well as who may participate in the lay-led services. This will be if you are qualified to do any sort of rites, sacraments, ordinances, everything. It's important to get a hold of the appropriate parties within your religious organization. Within some, it may be just your local church is the authority to submit paperwork to be your representation for the RO. Within other denominations, this may be at a higher level. Like myself, for instance, I'm Presbyterian. So my local church, if I wanted to be a religious lay leader and I was a sailor, could not actually provide information as my religious organization. I would need to go all the way to the presbytery level at the national level and have somebody from that office submit the information. So make sure that you're doing the research within your particular faith background, faith group, to find out who it is that needs to submit this information for it to be credible. And they will let us know, yes, this person is in good standing, and within our faith background, with the education they have, the participation they have in the faith, they may participate in these things. So if for any reason you were, say, ordained in a particular faith group, they would have to specify this person can do the sacraments, they can do baptism, they can do communion, whatnot. So that all has to be specified in your letters of recommendation, what you can and can't do. And those letters should also state who can participate in worship that you are leading. So there may be some restrictions within your faith background on who can attend your service, so that needs to be included as well. The religious organization is responsible for the amount and type of training that they require for religious leaders. So this training is a Navy training. This is to take care of the Navy PQS for a religious lay leader. Your particular religious organization may have additional trainings. I know our Roman Catholics have to actually meet with a priest. So in some cases, a chaplain or contracted person, the same RO, may assist with this training. So the religious lay leader, that's going to be you. You are to be interviewed and recommended by a supervisory chaplain. You are appointed in writing by the CO. That's a 1-year appointment. It can be 1 year or less. So the CO will actually determine how long that appointment will be. Just can't be any longer than a year. Not too much of a need, CONUS, for religious lay leaders when you are in port, because there are so many options actually in town. So a lot of times the CO will just appoint the religious lay leader for the time of a deployment, and they may extend that longer just in case there are any circumstances where the deployment is extended, to make sure that they have a religious lay leader during that time. Religious lay leaders are members of the DoD recognized faith group. We have a list that I know our yeomen use. It's something like 220 different faith groups. Now, that isn't necessarily going to be the same list that will be a recognized faith group for religious lay leadership, but it is an extensive list. Again, we are to ensure that we are meeting the needs of all of our sailors so that they are able to freely practice and exercise their religious background as we are constitutionally granted the right to do. So RLLs perform religious services which comply with the religious organization's teachings and practices, and according to the statements provided in the religious lay leader certification. That's that letter I was talking about your religious organization will be sending in. That'll specify exactly what you can do, who you can do it for. Okay. So we have a question. After 1 year, do we have to start the entire lay leader again before the next deployment, or will it just need to be another letter to the CO? I've had this question before. From my understanding, we do have to completely do the training again. It is a little bit easier, quicker. You can, if you would like, if you have a supervisor or chaplain and go through it with you again, it can be done as a review, but you do need to go through the process again. So you will need a new letter from the your religious organization. All the paperwork needs to be updated, and in order to have that new appointment, it does need to be completely redone. So it's not just a new letter from the CO. You actually have to have everything redone. As a religious lay leader, you will advertise and provide services according to your specific religious organization. Part of that is you need to actually specify what particular faith group you are representing. So if you're having a service on ship, you can't just say like a general Protestant service. You can say a Protestant service from the Southern Baptist tradition, something like that. Just something that specifies what your religious organization is. That's a kind of a newer guidance that we have in our newer religious ministries instruction of the Department of the Navy, that it's very important that we are completely transparent about what particular faith background we are representing. So the religious lay leaders also receive and seek support from a supervisory chaplain. That will be, say if you're in a DESRON, that'll be your DESRON chaplain. Sometimes there will be deployment situations where you don't have direct supervision from a chaplain, so it would go to whatever the next echelon is of a chaplain. So there will be chaplain oversight of everything. That's not going to be theological oversight because, again, you are here to represent your faith background. That's not the chaplain's job to judge what you are doing within that, but it's to ensure that you are carrying out your duties as necessary to make sure that the needs are being met by the service members and that there's nothing that is illegal going on. So there are restrictions on some of the things that we do. We just need to make sure that you're communicating with chaplains in regard to those. And then you report regularly to the chaplain on service conducted and status of ministry. When we get into the appendix of NTTP 1.05.1, Mike, there are some forms you're actually going to be filling out on, typically it's a monthly basis, so you'll put in all your numbers, everything in there, and you'll want to submit those to your chaplain each month. Typically, it's best if you can have an in-person or email, phone, some sort of actual meeting with the chaplain so you can go over how that previous month has gone and find out if there's any issues, concerns that need to be addressed. All right, so continuing on the religious lay leader. As a leader, you model the core values of the Navy and the Marine Corps. You're modeling honor, courage, commitment. You maintain exemplary personal performance, contribute to good order and discipline and effective execution of the command religious program, and you don't allow your religious lay leader duties to interfere with your primary duties. Again, this is a collateral, so we want to make sure that you are still focusing primarily on your primary duties, but that along the side, as a collateral, that you're taking care of the needs of those of your particular faith group in the command religious program. It's important that we have people as religious lay leaders that are, again, representing not only their faith background well, but are representing the Navy well. So we definitely want people that are of the highest standard, people that are representing those core values and always performing high. That is something COs will consider as they would with any collateral. If it is interfering with your function of your primary duties, it may be a point where they would bring you in. Maybe the chaplain would talk to you first, CO would talk to you. Not very often you have people removed from religious lay leader positions, but make sure that it's not interfering with your primary duties. All right, so this time I'll actually hand off to Chaplain Reedy, and he's going to be going over the kind of the standards that we have within the NTTP, and I'll come back at the end.
Hi, so I'm Chaplain Reedy, and I'm with RLL2020 right now. And so this middle part would be kind of identifying what specifically you'll be doing and how it relates to the command religious program in general. And one thing is, as was already mentioned, that there is a requirement from the Navy and from the Department of Defense that the commander provides a command religious program, and that it belongs to him or her. So as a religious lay leader, you are part of that team that provides for the spiritual needs of in your command. And the chaplains are the only ones that are trained religious providers. So we're the ones who actually are trained as religious providers to directly provide for the needs. And however, since, as was already mentioned, there are over 200 different religious traditions recognized by the Navy, and there are a limited number of chaplains, you serve an incredibly valuable task of service of providing for and gathering a community and providing for their spiritual needs. The religious lay leaders are temporary members of a command religious program, as we already mentioned. That it's an annual appointment that has to be renewed, and the renewal process is easier each time, so it does get a little bit more streamlined. But it is an annual appointment. And another thing that's really important to keep in mind is that, as we all know, one of the big functions that a chaplain has, one of the things that the chaplain is able to provide for the service members is confidentiality, that the communications to a chaplain are 100% confidential, and therefore all communications belong entirely to the sailor who communicates. And in that case, the chaplain enjoys that, and there is some sharing of an RP in that communication as the ability of confidentiality, the ability to steer the person towards the chaplain. But one thing to keep in mind is that as a religious lay leader, you do not enjoy that same confidentiality. So that's an important thing to keep in mind, that although you will at times be engaged with your sailors in a way that is personal, that you remain still a mandated reporter on things that would touch on things like harm to self or others, or SAPR-related events, etc. So while you may be engaged with sailors in such a way spiritually that kind of information may come up, it's important to keep in mind that you do not share in the same level of confidentiality. And it's also to keep in mind that that as a religious lay leader, you'll be serving and pulling your community together and leading them in various operational environments. And one of the big things that means for us a lot of times is that you have to be aware of deployments, that you have to make sure that before a deployment you have all the resources that you need planned, because it's hard to get them once you're out. Planning for the operational environments in which we will find ourselves and which you will be doing your work is important. As a religious lay leader, you're a uniformed service member appointed by the commander and authorized to perform religious services to support the command religious program as RMT members. So you are an intrinsic part of the religious ministry team. And the main purpose for you, your main goal, is to form a community of people in your faith tradition and to conduct religious services for that tradition. That's the main feature that you do. Make sure that every faith group within the ship has the opportunity of having worship according to their tradition. And that's the main role that you play, is that you multiply that across the ships, because the chaplains are simply not capable of providing that. We will facilitate your providing that care. Again, as a limitation, it's the distinction between your role, as in gathering the community of faith to which you belong and providing for worship. It's important to keep the distinction between that role and a chaplain clear, that you're not a religious ministry professional in the same way, and that therefore to keep in mind what your actual purpose is, which is to gather and lead services. Religious lay leaders do not deliver any tasks associated with care and advise. So the 4 competencies of a chaplain are that they provide directly for the needs of their faith tradition. They facilitate for the spiritual needs of all sailors, particularly by utilizing you and other religious lay leaders. They care for the sailors by providing a lot of counseling and confidential care, and they advise the command. That where you fit into those competencies is under facilitate. Utilizing our little army of religious lay leaders, we should be able to. The responsibilities are distributed across, first, it's important to keep in mind that everything in the Command Religious Program belongs to the commanding officer. The Command Religious Program is the program of the commanding officer for his or her command. And so it's important to keep that in mind, that you are a part of that team, and that whatever you're doing in your ministry and your worship with your community belongs to the commanding officer and is part of his or her intention for meeting the spiritual needs of the crew, which means that you should be in communication and make sure that chain of information is intact. They know what you're doing, and that what you're doing is consistent with what they're wanting. The chaplain is primarily responsible for the Command Religious Program on behalf of the commanding officer, and including interviewing and preparing and meeting the needs of all the religious lay leaders. There's some repetition here, as Ryan mentioned, but the purpose of that is to make sure that it gets deeper in there. Your religious organization, the responsibilities that they have are, first of all, giving you a letter of authorization to make it very clear what exactly they're charging you to do. So for different religious traditions, they're empowering you or limiting you in different ways. So making sure that you have that clear, there'll be a letter from your religious organization that should state clearly what that is. If you, as we'll talk about towards the end, if you need help in identifying who you should be contacting within your religious organization, then you can ask us and we can help you find that. Now, one thing is with your chaplain is understanding kind of the relationship that you have to the chaplain. And that is that you should make sure that you're remaining in consistent contact. The chaplain is there to support you. I mean, we really value our religious lay leaders. We understand them as being an absolutely crucial part of the team. And what we want to do is to support you, to make sure that you're trained and equipped, and that you know what you're tasked to do by your religious organization, and that you have all the materials that you need to carry out that task. And then we want to make sure that you feel supported and that you have the opportunity of asking questions and that we understand what you're having and can support you. So the main thing is to always remain in solid communication with your command chaplain about the needs of your community and what your community is doing. We have tools to help you with that, which we'll discuss a little bit later. But the main thing is that understand your chaplain as being somebody who's not going to try to control in any way what you're doing with your group as far as theologically or what we don't even know the needs of your religious organization. But what we want to do is support you and make sure that you have what's necessary to be effective as a religious lay leader. You are responsible for complying with the practices and teachings of your religious organization. We don't know, as a chaplain, we very well may not know. So I will know for the Roman Catholic religious lay leaders, I will know what they are and aren't able to do. But the chaplain is not able to know for each specific group what those things are. So you, as the religious lay leader, are responsible for knowing what you can and can't do and what your religious organization is expecting you to do and expecting you not to do. So it's your responsibility to make sure that you know that. And that should be spelled out clearly in the letter from your religious organization. You're responsible to seek support from chaplains outside the chain of command if you don't have a chaplain there. So if you do not have a chaplain currently with you, then you should be seeking out for chaplain support in some way, including arranging for meetings with a chaplain or for a chaplain to visit if that's possible. Arranging for transportation to an appropriate service when outside support is unavailable or not practical. That includes assisting with the process of bringing a chaplain to you or bringing your sailors to another location for worship services. You're responsible for providing religious services as appointed in your tradition, and responsible to model the core values of the Navy and Marine Corps, honor, courage, and commitment, and exhibit exemplary personal performance and behavior. So you, as a representative of your religious organization, you also in some ways represent the spiritual tradition in general, the human nature of a connection to God. So therefore, it'd be a kind of a higher scrutiny on you, and you'll be held to another standard, which is a compliment to you about the role that you play within the crew, a role of leadership that includes spiritual leadership, which means holding yourself to a higher moral and ethical standard as an example for others to follow. Also responsible to contribute to the good order and discipline and execution of the command religious program. So to excellence within what you do for your religious organization. Appointments are predicated on identified religious needs within the command in accordance with the most recent religious needs assessment. As was mentioned at the beginning, is that a religious needs assessment is periodically taken to assess the needs of a specific command. And then what we find out is how many sailors are practicing various faith traditions. And then the response of the command is to make sure that the chaplains are able to facilitate everyone's needs. And so therefore we start to select and request nominations for somebody as somebody has nominated you to serve as a religious lay leader. So that comes from a demand by there being other people on the ship who share the same faith. Volunteers who are not officially appointed as religious lay leaders may participate and assist chaplains, but are not authorized to lead services. So anyone who is interested in participating in some active way within their faith tradition are capable of doing so, but not acting as a religious lay leader with the full responsibilities of a lay leader unless they're appointed so. In the selection process, as you have all already seen, is that what we do is we ask commands. These are the needs that we know within our command. These are the faith groups that we have established, and it looks like we have these needs for religious lay leaders. We assess who we have already, and then we solicit for names to be submitted to us of possible new leaders. And then those prospective religious lay leaders are then interviewed and going through this training, and then we will walk you through the process as we go through today. Civilian credentials do not constitute authorization to serve as a religious lay leader. So even if your religious organization has given some kind of credential, like some different religious traditions have licenses to preach, etc., that does not authorize you to be a religious lay leader, but instead you actually have to have the approval and the letter from your command. Appointment as a religious lay leader does not convey ecclesiastical status, so the opposite is true from what I just said. So being a religious lay leader appointed by your commanding officer does not necessarily give you the same credential within your ecclesiological or religious system. So to flip the example I used a moment ago, being confirmed by your commanding officer with a letter to serve as a religious lay leader within your tradition doesn't mean that you're licensed to preach within your tradition. That is according to your own religious system. Just an interesting fact: the chaplain's pennant is the only pennant in the United States Navy that flies above the national ensign, and we'll talk more about those in a moment. The appointment process is that the chain of command makes the recommendations. That's already happened. We've already solicited to your commands for prospective religious lay leaders, and you've been tapped and nominated as somebody who might be a potential candidate for that. And once that we verify the prospective candidate demonstrates the required leadership characteristics, that's what they're looking for. They want to make sure that there is no history of misconduct. In other words, that you're a good example of to lead people, and not just in worship, but to lead them spiritually, which means morally and ethically, and that also that you're able to take on another collateral without compromising your primary duty. When I first arrived on the USS New York, the AFO introduced himself to me, and he introduced himself first as a religious lay leader and then as the AFO. which was interesting because he really, really prized that dimension. And I really encourage you, if you do become a religious lay leader, then please do. We value this service to your brothers and sisters in the Navy, and we hope that you take it very seriously, because there is, I think that the chaplains will agree, there is nothing better than a great religious lay leader. I mean, it's so fantastic as a chaplain to have a team of good religious lay leaders that form a community and that kind of really keep a lively community going and meeting people's spiritual needs. It's really rewarding. And but one of the things that your command is looking at is to make sure that you can take this collateral seriously while not compromising your primary duty. Your command chaplain then will interview you, and there's an interview form in the index that we'll talk about, and to make sure to ask you about why you want to be a religious lay leader, and how you understand that role, and kind of how you would see yourself serving. And so we'll have a conversation with you about that with the interview, and that's the next step in the process. And then you also have to receive the endorsement from your religious organization, and that is different for different religious organizations. So they have different standards. Like for me, again, for our accrediting body, our religious organization requires the bishop of the military archdiocese to give you the permission. So the religious organization verifies that the member is in good standing with your religious organization, that you actually practice that religion according to whatever that means, and that you're of good moral character. The religious organization also verifies that your member is authorized to assist in organizing or leading services, so they make sure that the Navy is also signing off on this, and that the religious organization verifies that what specific sacraments, ordinances, or rites you're authorized to conduct. So the religious organization is making sure that you are going to be capable of doing this, and that you're of good moral standing, that you have whatever criteria are required for ministry within that religious group, and then they specify specifically what you can do, and that's their responsibility to make sure that you know exactly what you are authorized to do or limited from doing. That's your religious organization's responsibility. In the appointment, is that the first thing is that, or actually the next thing is that the member completes the religious lay leader training, which is what we're doing right now. Then interviewing with the chaplain, which will happen next. And then you'll route this whole process up, and we'll talk about those forms at the end. And then you'll receive your letter of appointment, which would be good for 1 year. Your senior chaplain, your command chaplain, will conduct coordinated command religious program, religious lay leader training for the commands preparing for deployment. So one of the things that's really important is at a time like this, so most of us are on shore duty right now, a few of us are deployed, but we try to use these times before deployments to prepare as many religious lay leaders as possible, so that you can already be ready when you go into deployment and have all of your materials. You can be trained underway, but then it becomes more complicated, because if you have particular materials or resources that you might need, they may be more difficult to get to you. That's why we try to do this pre-deployment. Each command should include a command religious program, religious lay leader training, and its annual training plan, which we're satisfying now. The RMTs implement command religious program, religious lay leader training using the document that we're using now, specifically Appendix E, which we will talk about in a moment. But Appendix E is normally each of the topics that we're talking about today signed off on individually. We will take care of that appendix by pre-signing a form and then sending it to you, since we can't be in person. The command religious program, religious lay leader training is an annual requirement. So each year to renew your command appointment letter, you do have to go through some version, or you get the opportunity of going through some version of this class to refresh your information. And things change somewhat frequently. So different instruction changes, especially sometimes with the religious organizations. So touching base with them is also very important, because sometimes the instructions change. There have been some relatively serious changes in the Roman Catholic religious lay leader program in the past few years. And even calling us religious lay leaders instead of just lay leaders is a change. So that's why this annual training is not just to make you jump through hoops, but to make sure that you're completely aware of what the current standards are. The religious organizations are responsible for the amount and type of training according to their manner and forms. So when you are reaching out to your religious organization, it's their responsibility to make sure that they communicate to you clearly what their requirements are and what you're capable of doing. So that's their responsibility. The command or ISIC chaplains should consult the chaplains of the religious organization from which they're seeking a religious lay leader applicant. So we will assist you in finding what the requirements are and making sure that you have a clear instruction from your religious organization. A certificate of completion for this training course, along with your CO's letter of appointment, will be entered into your service record of the service member, and then you'll keep a copy of those in your service jacket. Religious needs assessment provide for the opportunity to identify the needs, requirements, and opportunities. So one thing is that we will be continuing to take religious needs assessments chaplains will be doing that within their commands and identifying any emergent new needs that may be there, or also just to identify the continuity of the needs that we've already identified. In other words, we want to make sure that we're meeting the spiritual needs of our sailors, so we have to find out what those needs are so that we can meet them. Your religious organization will define the functions and parameters of religious practices for y'all. Like I said, that it's their responsibility to communicate that clearly, and if we will be in a process to make sure that that is clear for you, so that you know with confidence what you are able to do and what your religious organization is asking you to do. Religious lay leader responsibilities are collateral duties and must not interfere with your primary duties, we've mentioned. And if there is a duty conflict of some sort, then notify your chaplain as soon as possible. In fact, just in general, make sure that you're in good communication with your chaplain about what's happening within your as a religious lay leader and what your needs are and what any conflicts are. So good communication is key here with your chaplain, who is there entirely to support you. On foreign soil, religious lay leaders should keep their chain of command informed of their activities. Just a question, why would you think this would be an instruction? So what is this getting at? On foreign soil, religious leaders should keep their chain of command informed of their activities. What's at play here?
Not to step on any toes of the foreigners' religious.
Exactly. So one thing is that you will be instructed because according to where we are, according to the Status of Forces Agreement or SOFA agreements that we have and enjoy in different areas that we serve, geographical areas that we serve, is that sometimes there are limitations on us about what we can and can't do on foreign soil. So one thing is that as a religious lay leader, if you are not informed actively already about any limitations or given a briefing about what things you can and can't do, then you should ask questions to make sure that you can act with confidence. Because in some areas, there are restrictions on the exercise of religion or preaching or such. And so, for instance, if you're going on liberty in some foreign country, you might want to go to a religious service, or you might want to do some kind of ComRel that you would be interested in organizing through the chaplain or through the RMT. And in those kinds of things, you would need to find out what the restrictions, if any, that there exist. Another thing is that if you're pulling into an area that has a dominant religious tradition, then according to SOFA, there may be restrictions. But another thing is that you should seek out, if there's a religious lay leader in your command of that same tradition, you can seek them out to find guidance. And if you are a religious lay leader of a tradition into an area that we're operating, then you should communicate that clearly with your chaplain, and you can serve as a great resource. Not only to advise the chaplain about the specifics of that religious tradition, but also potentially coordinate with the chaplain or the religious ministry team in coming up with something like a ComRel in that area that would be effective. So the thing is just to be aware of whatever the limitations or possibilities are within different geographic regions and cultures, and then to be able to, as a religious lay leader, engage that responsibly. So know if there are any limitations on you about visiting places or exercising your religion on foreign soil, or whether or not you would have specific resources that you might be able to help the command and or chaplain understand. So in both directions, just be aware of that. And again, this is where communication is important. Religious lay leaders should consult the supervisory chaplain or the religious organization for worship and prayer resources. So one thing to keep in mind and that you should be thinking of now is what kinds of things will you need? Because again, in pre-deployment, it's really easy. It was much easier to get things than it is if you're underway or deployed. And so one thing that you should be in conversation with your supervisory chaplain and your religious organization are what kinds of things, materials, books, resources might you need to be effective in your work. And so that's a conversation you need to have with both the chaplain and with your religious organization if you don't know already what kinds of things you need. The chaplains and the commanding officers should consult JAG regarding gifts of equipment, materials, or supplies from a religious organization or any source of lay-led service. So sometimes there is a budget for the needs of the religious ministry team of the command and religious program. And so the main thing is to communicate those needs clearly to your chaplain, and then to be in conversation with the chaplain about the procurement of those goods. Sometimes you'll find that your religious organization or other sailors or you yourself will want to contribute personal funds or private funds towards the procurement of various things you might need. The main important thing there is to make sure that you're communicating clearly with the chaplain about anything like that, because the chaplain will give you guidance about that. And that has to be done. Like, some resources can be received directly from the religious organization, but the main thing is that all procurement for materials necessary to do what you need to do, the valuable work you do, and we understand and really appreciate that you have materials and we want to get those in your hands. We want to make them available. But make sure you're communicating about how that's going about, because it can be problematic as far as just the receiving of gifts. So, chaplains and RPs can assist in determining essential non-expendable and expendable materials and equipment for religious lay leaders. So as you come up with the kinds of things that you might need and suggestions of things you might want, then again, the main thing here is communication. Communicate to the chaplains, communicate to the RPs, and they can kind of help you assess what we have already, what they have at hand, what they have a budget for, and how to procure things. So the main thing is all procurement, anything that you need to carry out your work effectively within your faith tradition, whatever you need, the RMT wants to get those resources to you. Make sure you're communicating about how you're getting them. Early identification of needed materials is important for deployments. I'll talk about that again in a moment. Religious organizations can help identify needed materials. If you don't know what you need, if you don't know what resources, especially maybe literature or materials like that you might need, or any kind of worship materials you might need, if you don't know, then talk to your chaplain and they may be able to help you, or talk to your religious organization about what you might need to get that clear so that you know, especially before you go. Religious lay leaders entrusted with custody of sacraments and sacred elements shall ensure equipment, containers, and usage meet the religious organization requirements. So again, this is just making sure that you know very clearly from your religious organization how you're supposed to carry out your role. So some religious traditions have sacred items that have very specific care requirements, and just make sure that you know what those are. So before you go, there's lots of things that you might want. Make the distinction between are things that you might want and things that you need. So identify in conversation with your chaplain and your religious organization the things that you need. And the things that you need, we need to make sure and procure them before a deployment so that you have them already in hand, because it's much more expensive and difficult to get them once you're underway or on a deployment. And these kinds of things that you might request is any literature that you need to support worship, or Bible study, or scripture study, or devotionals. It's any liturgical items like oils or candles or any other kind of supply like that. And then there's also just things that you might want, so devotional elements, devotional items that you might want. And so the main thing is to identify what those things are, the things that you need in conversation with your religious organization, the things that you might want in conversation with your community, or just things that you know, and then communicate all of those things clearly to your command chaplain. Then they will be able to help you understand how to get those things and help you discern between things you need and things you might want. The religious lay leader supplies may include consumable items such as candles, oils, or other items used to support religious services. For deployments or extended exercises, you should work with your RMT, develop a plan for acquiring and stowing materials and consumables. So some things are required to be received fresh. So like for some traditions, you may have bread or wine or other consumables that you have to have either fresh or delivered at some frequency, or like wine has certain restrictions to it. And so that's why early planning for making sure that the chaplain and the RMT knows what you need and then has a plan for it being delivered as necessary. So that requires some just work beforehand, some pre-deployment work to make sure that there's a plan in place. Again, it's in here several times because it is important, and it's one of the things that sometimes can cause some confusion, is understanding what your role is as a religious lay leader. You will be a trusted member of your religious community, which means that you will share information about prayer requests, about personal life, and you'll talk about many things. That's an important role that you do with within your tradition. And so for the community that you form, you will be a spiritual leader with them, and therefore they will trust you with information. But keep in mind that you do not enjoy confidentiality. So in all the ways the Navy has already identified to you that you are a mandated reporter, you remain a mandated reporter. So it's important for your sailors that you communicate that clearly to them so that they don't presume confidentiality and then put both of you in a difficult situation where you then have to, they think they're communicating to you in a confidential manner, but you don't enjoy confidentiality. So it's just important to keep that in mind for yourself and to communicate that as you form your community to make sure that's clear. Because you will, hopefully, I mean, if you're doing your job well, you'll be entering into really, deep, important conversations about the most important questions about life related to your religious tradition and the life experience of the community that you form. So making sure you understand clearly what confidentiality means and communicating clearly that you don't enjoy that is important to protect you and to protect your sailors. If a religious lay leader becomes inadvertently aware of confidential communications in the course of their duties as a religious lay leader, they must keep the information confidential and immediately refer the matter to the chaplain. It's about information custody. So if you are given confidential information, you're now a mandated reporter on that information. So something related to physical harm to self or others, or SAPR-related events. These are things that you have to report. But your responsibility to report is complete when the custody information is complete by passing them off to a chaplain. So then you've passed off the person and their information to the chaplain, who is now in possession of the information. So then your responsibility is done. So the main goal for you is like I said, if you're taking this seriously, you'll be playing a leadership role in the spirituality and the experience of your sailors, and therefore you're going to be trusted with information. If you find that some of that information touches in those protected categories, then now your responsibility is to get that person and that custody of that information to a chaplain as soon as possible and pass them off to the chaplain, and therefore the chaplain then can move forward with the custody of the information. In other words, then the person becomes again in possession of the same information.
And if I can add, it is important in those situations that you feel like a conversation is going that way, because it may, as your religious lay leader, people are going to look to you. As soon as you feel like it's moving in that direction, don't be afraid to stop the person and say, I think this might be something that's going to be better handled with the chaplain. I don't have confidentiality. And at that point, refer that to the chaplain, so that way you don't have the weight of that on yourself.
Yeah, that's excellent advice. So if hopefully you can hear that. But yeah, so this will happen within your community more than likely, is that if you're talking with somebody and they're sharing with you and you get the sense that the conversation is moving towards one of those protected categories, then it's responsible. It protects you and the sailor to remind them of the limitation of confidentiality and suggest to them that they go to a chaplain. And so that they may want to continue with you. It's possible, but you should protect you and them by making them aware of that and offering the possibility of going to a chaplain so they could enjoy that 100% confidentiality. Commanders commit to supporting religious lay leaders. That means very religious. So we're religious lay leaders are very religious. Within the supplies, time to prepare and exercise their religion, space for worship, and other required resources. So the thing is, you are part of the command religious program that belongs to the commander. And your commander, he or she, is appointing you and has nominated you and then appoints you to carry out that work. And therefore, they are responsible for making sure that you have what's necessary to do so, which means supplies, so any materials that you might need, they're then responsible for making sure you have those supplies. 2, time to prepare, because leading worship is not something that you can just do. It requires preparation. And so that's you need to be given, and they're kind of committing to give you the opportunity to have the time necessary to prepare your remarks or comments or the worship, whatever it is that your tradition does, to prepare it well, so that the product that you're producing in the commander's name is executed in an excellent fashion. So sometimes you have to kind of make those needs clear to the RMT, to the chaplain, who will then make sure to communicate that to the commander. But it's important for you to keep in mind that the commander is asking you to do this, tasking you with this, and tasking you, therefore, to do it excellently, to do it well. And so you have to communicate what those needs might be about materials you need, time you might need, and space that you might need to carry out your work well. So don't hesitate in communicating what those needs are to your chaplain so that you can produce an excellent product and that you can satisfy in an excellent way the commander's intention. COs approve times and locations for lay-led services, always in a very tentative manner. So especially understand that underway, you have to be very flexible, that both times and locations can shift very frequently, like everything does in the Navy. So semper gumby, just always remain flexible. Make sure that you do protect your community. So make sure that you do represent your community and make sure that a time and a place is made available, but then be willing to move those times and places as necessary, as flexible as just the battle rhythm requires. An important point is that all publicity should be approved in writing by the commanding officer prior to publication. So it's really important for you to form a community, and doing so means you need to get the word out and you need to communicate what's going to happen, what the possibilities are. It's just really important to pass that by the commanding officer to make sure that it satisfies what they're asking you to do. So all publicity related to your work, and it's important to publicize. So don't let this be a barrier to doing publicity, because you have to form that community. That's your first goal, really, is to form a community. And so you need to publicize it. Don't let this requirement be a barrier, but you need to have some other eyes on that publicity to make sure that it actually does satisfy what the commanding officer is looking for. Publicity must name the religious organization represented. So as Chaplain Ryan mentioned earlier, is that whatever religious organization is endorsing you, whoever is giving you their approval, it needs to be clear that that is what your worship is. So you always have to specifically stamp that whatever your faith tradition is, that whatever the event is, it must be clear. Like you can't just say Bible study. If it has to be a Bible study within your tradition, so that people know what they're getting. Religious lay leaders maintain records of the number and type and attendance of the services conducted, and which we will look at one of these documents in a moment. So the main thing is that you're able to communicate clearly to the chaplain and then therefore also to the commanding officer what exactly it is that you're doing. You'll keep records, and in the appendix, in the back of our document, we have first a plan of action. So Appendix J is that before you do a service of some sort, this Appendix J gives you a little timeline of things you need to do about planning the time, planning the place, getting approval, whatever kind of publication you want to do, the service prepared, to rig for the worship, whatever that means according to tradition, conduct the service, and then secure afterwards. So that the entire timeline, you should be filling this out with each service that you do to capture all that information. It also makes using this checklist, which is a standardized form, makes things move a lot more quickly, and it guarantees you don't miss any details along the way. And then afterwards, you'll then fill out for the publicity checklist. You need to make sure that that Appendix K is followed, which we'll talk about more in just a moment. But we have these resources here to help you, so that with regularized and standardized forms, you can make sure and capture all the information that you need. Now that is essentially what you will be doing, and now Chaplain Ryan will be presenting to you all the resources at the end of the document, the resources that you have at hand to help you do what you're doing well.
these are going to be the items that are actually signed off on in the appendix of your NTTP that shows that you've gone through all of the PQOS and you understand everything. And so I'm just going to briefly go through each of these items. Appendix E2. And when you actually look at it in the NTTP, it has the actual instructions, the applicable instructions right under it. So if you want to do further deep dive, which I would recommend, go ahead and look into those instructions, look at these sections, and just get a fuller understanding yourself of these. But the first one, 101, is the free exercise of religion is the CO's obligation. That one's pretty straightforward. As a commanding officer, it is your duty, their duty, to ensure that everybody within their command has the opportunity to practice their faith equally. And with that, we're going to have the religious needs assessments that we mentioned that will survey the command to find out what faith groups there are and if there's a need within that. With that being said, how many members do you think you need within a particular faith group to include that in the command religious program? If you have one person within the command that has a desire, a need to have their faith met while they're under deployment and whatnot, then that constitutes as something that should be included in the command religious program, because that one person, if they're not allowed to practice their faith freely, then that is not achieving the goal, the mission of the command religious program. So we're going to want to make sure that we can carry out whatever it is within that group. Now, would that require one person to have a religious lay leader? Probably not, because they can self-facilitate things if it's just themselves. But to be part of the command religious program, we do want to make sure that we have an understanding of what's going on and who needs their needs met. And that's where we can facilitate as well outside of the command to find ways that we can assist them in meeting their religious needs. So 102, the command religious program ensures ministry takes place and is practiced freely. So that's going to make sure that we do have services. We did mention earlier that it is going to be, we have to be flexible. There may be mission necessities that will not allow us to do a service at a particular time or on a particular day. There may be periods that we're not able to have services, but we're not going to restrict anybody's ability to have those needs met. It may not be in the time that we particularly want to have it, but those needs will be met. It's an eventuality that we will make sure within the command religious program that everybody is able to practice their faith freely. 103, Navy chaplains are the primary source of this provision. As mentioned earlier, the chaplain is essentially the tool that carries out the command religious program on behalf of the commanding officer. The COs don't have the background to actually provide and facilitate the religious needs of the sailors, so that's where the chaplains are coming in, and we ensure that this is carried out, and it is our primary responsibility to provide for the needs of our sailors and Marines. 104, respectful speech and behavior, good order and discipline. That's going to be not only language, that's also going to be making sure that our religious lay leaders are being held to the highest standard and that they are respecting the rights of every other sailor, even outside of their own faith background. So we're not going to have religious lay-led services where we have a religious lay leader that is bashing another particular faith group. That would not be in good order discipline. That would not be respectful speech. So we want to ensure that we are carrying out the particular faith needs of our background without stepping on the faith needs of another person. So we want to make sure that we are being respectful and we're being in good order and discipline when we're carrying out these services. Section 105, religious lay leaders will not use language contrary to good order and discipline, speaking against national command policy, nor will they disparage another faith group. So I kind of hit on that already. And in addition, that does go into a lot of what our UCMJ covers on speaking out against policy, that kind of thing. We're not going to have religious lay-led services that are trying to start an uprising against the U.S. government. So pretty obvious things, but they need to be in there, and we want to make sure that we are operating at the highest possible standards. Because again, as a member of the religious ministry team, you are representing the command religious program, which is representing your command and your CO, so make sure that you are representing well. All right. 105, presence of religious lay leaders ensures all faith groups may be represented in the absence of a chaplain of a particular faith. So we mentioned before, there are about 850 chaplains. Most of us are varying flavors of Christianity. We do have an imam, a couple of Buddhist priests. We have some rabbis. We have some priests. And we just cannot cover everything as chaplains. We have so many personnel that the Commander's Religious Program is responsible for. So religious lay leaders, again, you guys are essential. You are here to actually provide what we can only facilitate. So you're going to provide those necessary services and ensure that the free exercise of faith takes place. 106, religious lay leaders are appointed in accordance with the needs of unit personnel based on the religious needs assessment. Kind of already hit on that. So this is going to be the need of the RNA. So again, if there is a person, there's a particular faith group, and they want some sort of a resource to be able to practice their faith group, that's enough to actually have it included in the Command Religious Program. 107, religious lay leaders are authorized by their religious organization and appointed by their CO. So we're going to require those religious organization authorization letters. One more time, those will include not only what you can practice, what you can and cannot do as a religious lay leader within your faith background, but also who can and cannot attend those services. 108, religious lay leaders are supervised by a uniformed chaplain. That may be a direct supervisory chaplain that is within your command, that just is not of the particular faith group you are, or it may be a Desron chaplain or the next level ISIC chaplain, that they're going to be responsible for ensuring that you are meeting the needs of your particular faith background while also staying within the regulations of the UCMJ and that sort of thing. One item actually that I did think of earlier that I forgot to mention was with supplies. So this isn't to do with this particular section, but don't assume that your chaplain knows how the proper handling is of particular supplies within your faith. Again, we are not part of that faith background. That's why we're not able to provide for it and why you are providing for it. I'd say an example is if you're a Muslim religious lay leader, your chaplain may not know that a Quran that is purely Arabic, so it's a sacred text, shouldn't be handled by a non-Muslim. So that's going to be your responsibility to let the chaplain know that and make sure they know all the restrictions. So at the same time, that chaplain might be acting out of what they think is good faith, and in order to keep anybody else from handling that Quran, they might put it in a safe. We want to make sure that safe isn't the same safe that the sacred wine is being kept in, because you don't have the Quran right next to alcohol. So make sure that you are letting your chaplains know about any restrictions of any supplies that you have for your particular faith background. So special issues pertinent with Navy instructions. This is going to be in the second section of Annex E2. Familiarize yourself with the following instructions. So 201, instructions for how religious ministry is practiced within the context of the U.S. Navy. That can be found in OPNAV instruction 1730.1 Echo and SECNAV instruction 1730.7 Echo. These are separate instructions. They do have information that is not entirely included in the others. So make sure that you're familiarizing with both of these things, because it's going to be important that along with what your religious organization says you can or can't do, that you're looking at these to know what the Navy says you can or cannot do. 202, instructions regarding the observance of the Sabbath can be found in Milpers Man 1731, TAC 010, and NAVREG Article 0817. So this is going to be essentially what prescribes the requirement for the CO to provide observance of a Sabbath within their commands. So that's going to be saying that, yes, there has to be time set aside for this practice. With that being said, again, we need to make sure that we're being flexible, because mission essential needs may impede upon practicing exactly when we want to. It's not going to say you can't practice your faith, but it's going to say we can't do it right now. We're going to have to postpone for this other time. Okay, so I see we have a question. What if our letter of appointment ends before the end of deployment? Would it be acceptable to continue until the end of deployment, i.e. a month or two before pulling into port? To actually perform as a religious lay leader, you do need to have a letter of appointment from the CO that covers that period. And that's why, where I mentioned earlier, a lot of times COs will extend it further than the actual deployment, so that if there's an extension, it will cover that period. If it does get to the point where you've been extended beyond the end of your letter of appointment, as long as it's still within the year, the CEO can write a new letter, or they can amend the letter to have a new end date. If it goes beyond the year, again, the process needs to be restarted, need to go through everything. But as long as it's within a year, there can be an extension letter that appoints you as a religious lay leader until this certain date. But it just needs to be within that 1 year. Okay, 203. Privilege and confidential communication is limited to chaplains. Religious lay leaders are not to engage in counseling and not protected by confidentiality as laid out in SecNav Instruction 1730.9 Alpha. So this is an instruction about confidential communication. As Brian had mentioned, religious lay leaders are not protected by any sort of confidentiality. You are mandatory reporters, so you should not be providing the care aspect of what the chaplains provide. So you're not going to be doing any sort of counseling. It doesn't mean you can't be somebody there for your sailors to talk to, but when it comes to actual counseling, confidential care, that needs to be done by a chaplain. Along with this, I have heard stories of religious lay leaders that go around wearing the title of chaplain, which is an absolute no. That's a no-fly zone. You cannot do that. Don't be referring to yourself as anything except for a religious lay leader, and make sure if anybody does come to you to talk about something that they understand the limitations of confidential communication, that actually needs to be handled by a chaplain. All right, 204. The religious service pennants are only to be flown during services conducted by chaplains according to U.S. Code Title 4, Chapter 1, Section 7. As Brian had mentioned, the chapel pennant is the only one that is ever flown above the national ensign, and that will only be done in services conducted by a chaplain. So religious lay-led services will not have the pennant flown, but any sort of chaplain service, that will be flown above the ensign on the ships. 205, religious offerings are not typically collected during religious lay-led services, but on occasion may be at the CO's discretion in writing and with the support of RP staff, according to SecNav Instruction 7010.6 Bravo. If you are on a ship being deployed or out in the field, if you're a Marine, you're really not ever going to have a situation where you're taking a religious offering fund. This is more for Oconus chapels, where out in the community, you're not going to have the opportunity for a lot of people to practice their faith. This was something, my first tour was in Bahrain. So although I was an installation chaplain at a chapel, because it was on foreign soil in a country where we did not have, for instance, a temple where our Jewish sailors could actually go and worship, we had religious lay leaders from the Jewish faith that would take care of all of those needs. And in these situations, there may be a right to do it. I guess the more specific example is myself not being Pentecostal gospel. I did not lead that kind of service, but we did have a religious lay leader because there was enough of a need in our religious needs assessment to have that held that service. And our religious lay leader was actually an ordained minister in that particular faith. It was Oconus. They could not go out in town to practice their faith. Tithing was important to their faith, so we were able to get in writing from the CO the ability to have a religious offering taken during that service. These are very rare, so as a religious lay leader, it's not likely you're going to face this situation, but it is a possibility to have, and again, that is at the CO's discretion. So for the most part, you're not going to need to have that deep of an understanding of a religious offering fund, but it is good to go ahead and read that instruction so that if you're ever in that situation, you understand how that works. Again, it's not recommended to have a religious lay-led service with an offering, and when that is done, it must actually create an additional ROF sub-account within the religious offering fund for that particular faith group. 301. If services are required for a religious professional, a religious lay leader should seek assistance from the supervising chaplain. So if there is something that is needed that's beyond your spectrum that is laid out in your RO's authorization letter, you need to talk to your chaplain to make sure this need can be met. A lot of different faith groups say for communion or the sacraments, they require somebody that is ordained to do that. And most likely as a religious lay leader, you won't be ordained. So if you would like to have that need met, you're going to need to work with your chaplain to try to find a way to get a religious professional that can take care of that need aboard your ship to wherever your unit is, whatever, so that we can take care of that need. 302, transportation. So transportation will be arranged by the religious lay leader under supervision of chaplain for services away from the command. This can be another thing that if you are in port somewhere and say you are a Latter-day Saint religious lay leader and there is a temple that you can go to in that location, you're going to want to coordinate with the chaplain to ensure transportation is taken care of. If there are any security concerns or measures that need to be taken into account, that is done, and you'll work with your chaplain again to make sure that those needs are met and that you're doing it appropriately so that your group of your faith group can actually take care of their needs by that and get to those services. 303, services. They'll be scheduled into the Command Religious Program calendar and celebrated on the regular day for a particular religious organization with extraordinary services for special faith group celebrations. So as mentioned before, the CO will actually specify the times at your guidance on when you will have your services. And that needs to be something that's done regularly within the constraints of mission essential requirements. You'll be having your service at that regular time. If there are any special services, any extraordinary services that your faith group practices, make sure you're letting your supervisory chaplain and your CO know about those in advance so that they are on the calendar and that they can be planned out and that people actually know that they're happening. 304, format, length, and rigging for services may differ from chapel to field based on the time constraints of the mission. So if you are on a ship or out in the field, you're going to have different resources available. You may not have everything you need as rigging for your services. If you're from a liturgical tradition, you may not have the ability to have all of the colors present for a particular day in the liturgical year wherever you are doing the service. So again, there needs to be flexibility there and understanding that we might not be able to take care of every single need to have those services, but it's going to be our duty as the chaplain and yours as the religious lay leader to do everything we can to ensure that those are all met, but again, being flexible and understanding that they might not be able to be done exactly the way we want. We have a helicopter here, probably maybe a holy helo, so that's something fun. Not really going to be something that religious lay leaders are doing, but sometimes we'll have chaplains that are part of, say, a carrier air group or a carrier group that they'll actually be on the carrier, but in order to get out to the different ships to perform services, they'll hop on a helicopter and fly out to the different supporting ships to offer services. One of the extra things they can do while they're going out to do that is not only offer services, but they can have that time that they can then meet with the religious lay leaders on those ships to, again, go over, okay, how are things going? They can go over paperwork, find out if there are any concerns the religious lay leaders have. So there can be a lot of communication there when we have chaplains that are going out to the different supporting ships, when they can actually have time to meet with the religious lay leaders. So if you are on one of these supporting ships, this is most likely going to be the chaplain that's going to be your supervisor chaplain, is somebody that can come out and see you on a somewhat regular basis so that we ensure that everything is being met for your faith group. Further logistic considerations and administrative procedures. 305, RPs and volunteers will assist in rigging for services. This is part of the RP's duty. As I mentioned, they kind of are jack of all trades. They do a lot of administrative work. They are our protectors, our personal bodyguards when we're in the field as chaplains, but they also do all the rigging for services. So RPs may or may not be from any particular faith background at all, but they have an understanding on how to set up for the different services, and they're going to be the ones that assist with that to make sure that the riggings are done for the services. So if there's anything special that you need for your services, you're going to be wanting to talk to the RPs so they know how to set things up. And typically they'll have a standard operating procedure manual so that they can refer to that when they're setting up for your service to make sure everything is ready to go when you're ready for your service. I see that we have on here, the religious lay leader should help get the word out about the chaplain coming for a visit. So if the chaplain is coming to your ship and they're going to be your supervisory chaplain, religious lay leader, you should be in communication with them fairly regularly. So whether that be email or whatnot, you should know when they are coming to your ship. And that's going to be your duty as a religious lay leader, even if they're not something that's for your particular faith group, that you're letting the ship know that the chaplain is coming on this day. So you're getting word out that people can come meet with the chaplain on that day. That's going to be for that chaplain's particular provision of a faith group. but also just in general so people know the chaplain's going to be there. So if they want to have any of those confidential communications with a chaplain, it's going to be your duty to make sure people know, hey, Chaps is going to be here this day, this time. Make sure if you want to talk to him, this is when you're going to be able to do it. So thank you for that comment. 306, any supplies needed for religious lay-led services should be communicated to supervising chaplain and will be purchased via the CRP appropriated funds. So any supplies that you need, this is why it's really important that we try to get religious lay leaders in place well before a deployment, because it takes time to get things, and it's going to be your responsibility of letting the chaplain know what you need for your services, and that will be worked into the RMT budget, to the Command Religious Program budget, which is made up of appropriated funds. So these are funds that the government gives the command, which are then distributed to the Command Religious Program to ensure that all of the faith needs are taken care of. So make sure that you are communicating what supplies you need to your supervisory chaplain so that these supplies can be on hand. 307, a log of services offered must be maintained. That's going to be Appendix M in your manual, and data collected for appropriated chaplain data calls. So chaplains are going to be, again, your supervisor, and we need to report these numbers as well. This is part of showing what is happening within the command and ensuring that we are showing that these needs are being met. So it's important that you do these logs, that you take this information down, you do these administrative steps, because this allows us to show the validity of having a religious lay leader over this group, that you are providing the service for your sailors. And again, it doesn't matter how many numbers you have, that's not important, but that you are actually meeting the needs of these sailors. So you could be a small group, you could be a huge group. Make sure you're keeping the numbers so that we can then report that on and show that we're taking care of the needs of our sailors and Marines. 308, religious lay leaders are appointed in writing by the CO for 1 calendar year from the start date. So we've hit on this one multiple times. Again, repetition assists in retention. It's important that you know that this is very important. It's 1 year. So anything beyond that 1 year, process needs to be started over. Yes, it goes much quicker if you've already been through it, but we can't have you going over that lapsed period, and the CO's appointment is for 1 year. Anything that you're operating outside of that could actually get somebody in trouble, so make sure that you're staying within that. You know when your dates are up. You know what you can and can't do. 309, religious lay leaders are to be supervised by a chaplain to ensure good order and discipline. Chaplains will not supervise theologically. So chaplains, again, are there to supervise you, to ensure that you are able to carry out your ministry as needed. I want to make sure everybody, can you still see us? Can I get some thumbs up? It's like we're having a little network issue. All right, good. So you're supervised by a chaplain. That's purely to supervise, to make sure that you're operating in the highest order of discipline and military tradition. But your chaplain is not there to supervise you theologically. You are here to take care of your particular faith background because your chaplain is not part of that faith group. So theologically, that's going to be up to you and your RO. The chaplain is there purely for the military side to ensure that the needs are being met within your faith tradition. So here we have an example of Appendix M that's going to be that report. So you're going to put in first week of the month, did this many worship services, this many scripture studies, other studies, special events. You'll indicate how many people were there. So this way, we're having accountability that these services are being offered, these needs are being met. So further logistic considerations and administrative procedures. 310, religious lay leaders should meet with their supervisory chaplain regularly to go over reports, supply needs, planning, etc. This is going to be a lot easier before you deploy. Most likely you'll have more access to your chaplain then. And again, after you deploy, getting supplies is going to be extremely difficult. So make sure you're meeting with your chaplain as much as possible before you go underway. And then once you are underway, everything you can to keep in touch with your chaplain, whether that be email or in the instances where they can actually come and visit the ship, make sure you're meeting with them, getting those reports done, and just communicating what needs your faith group has. 311. Religious lay leader appointment will be removed if any of the following apply. 1 calendar year expires. When the religious lay leader leaves the command. If the collateral interferes with the religious lay leader's primary responsibilities, or when the command has lost confidence in the religious lay leader. So this is important to know, is that because you have this appointment by the CO, it can also be revoked at any time. Make sure you're staying at the highest standards of order and discipline. Make sure that it's not interfering with your primary duties, because again, this is a collateral. And if you leave the command, your letter does not go with you. It's strictly within that command by appointment of that particular CO. So you have that 1 year or shorter time that's specified by the CO in writing in that appointment letter. All right, so section 4 is the standards of conduct. 401, religious lay-led services are to be thoughtfully organized and conducted in an orderly manner. Although this is a collateral, again, you are representing the Command Religious Program and the command, the CO, when you're doing the services. So please do not just throw something together just to have it so you can put on your evals that you were doing this as a collateral. Do this well. Make sure that you have a good understanding within your faith tradition, and then you are doing it justice as well as the Command Religious Program. 402, religious lay leaders as representatives of the Command Religious Program are to respect the religious rights of every sailor, Marine, Coast Guardsman as protected under the Constitution. So every single member of the DoD, every citizen of the United States has the free exercise of their religion. This gets back to that comment I was making earlier. Do not be disparaging any other faith groups. You're not here to speak out against one faith group. You're here to represent your faith group. So please stay within your wheelhouse there and just represent your faith group well. 403, no disparaging remarks of another faith group. We've already covered that. So make sure you're keeping it within your own particular faith group. Do not be speaking poorly of another group. 404, all literature promotion materials must be approved by the command. So anything that you are sending out to advertise services or any materials that you would like to get out to the command, make sure that they're approved by the command. Sometimes that could be unwarranted solicitation if you decide you're going to blast email the command with something that is from your particular faith group, because that could be seen, since you are operating within the Command Religious Program, as the command endorsing a particular faith group. So constitutionally, we're not allowed to do that. You want to make sure that you're staying within the rights of what we can do. So make sure anything that you would like to send out for your services, for your faith group, is approved by the CO first. 405, utilize your religious ministry team chain of command to communicate with the CO. Typically, you're not going to be going directly to the CO. That's part of the chaplain's 4 pillars. Again, they're provide, facilitate, care, advise. That advise one is where we speak directly to the command about what our needs are within the Command Religious Program. So if you have something that you need, you want to get something approved by the CO, go through your chain of command, go through the RPs, through the chaplain, and make sure it goes up to the CO by the proper channels. 406, religious lay leaders represent the religious ministry team and therefore are held to a higher standard in regards to speech and behavior. Just like when you're out in town, if you're wearing your uniform, you are representing the United States Navy and you want to represent it well. When you are a religious lay leader, even if you are not conducting a service at that particular time, people know you are a religious lay leader within the Command Religious Program. So at all times, you have to be conducting yourself at a high standard. 407, sacraments and ordinances are only to be conducted by religious lay leaders with appropriate credentialing and approval from their RO. That's what I was mentioning before. A lot of faith groups, within the Christian faith in particular, because that's my understanding, you are required to be ordained to practice the sacraments. So if you're in one of those groups, you're not ordained, your RO will not put in your letter that you are allowed to do those things. So if it's not specified in your letter of authorization, you cannot carry those things out. So it's very important that you're sticking to what that letter of authorization says. You're not going outside of that to do anything extra. 408, religious lay leaders are not chaplains and do not have confidential protection. As such, they should not be conducting counseling. So I hit on this before. As a religious lay leader, because you don't have confidentiality, again, it doesn't mean you can't be a shoulder for somebody to lean on, somebody to talk to, but when it comes to actual counseling, make sure you're referring them to a chaplain, to the appropriate channel, because you're not a chaplain, you're not protected by confidentiality, so you should not be holding actual counseling sessions. 409, religious lay leaders are not to solicit nor accept charitable funds unless otherwise specified in writing in advance by the CO. So this is where we want to make sure that we're leaning on our JAGs. The CO will lean heavily on the JAGs in this area to know what you can and cannot accept for your services. Some examples here may be you may have a Jewish faith group that wants to lend a Torah to the command because it can be very expensive, but they see that there's a lot of Jewish members in the command and they want to make sure that you have that for the services. But at the same time, there can be a lot of restrictions on that, especially if it's being lent, on what the accountability is for those items. And then if they are gifting it, things of high value gifts, we want to make sure that there's no conflict of interest, anything going on there. So anytime that there is going to be a charitable giving from outside, refer to your chain of command, go through the chaplain who will go through the CO, who will refer the JAGs, and will make sure that these gifts can or cannot be accepted. So here we have our pluralism. We have members of many different faiths in this picture, and this really is what you are helping us to represent, because chaplains can only represent so many members of our service members in the provision capacity. So you are going to help us here. And you're operating in a pluralistic environment. So again, that's where it comes to, don't be disparaging any other faith groups, just support your own faith group. All right, so 410, religious lay leaders are not to accept any goods, benefits, or services for their role as a command religious lay leader, or command religious program religious lay leader. What that's saying is it's pretty similar to things you already see in the UCMJ for accepting gifts. We're not to accept gifts because we're a member of the military. You're not to accept any sort of gifts for yourself because you're a religious lay leader. If somebody wants to offer you something, don't accept it. I think this is to the point where we don't even need to refer to the JAG. Just do not accept any gifts that are somebody's trying to give you because of your role as a religious lay leader. All right, 411, we serve in a pluralistic environment, and religious lay leaders shall not proselytize or pressure others to attend worship services. This does not mean you can't go out and tell people about your service. It doesn't mean you can't go out and tell people about your faith. What it means is that you have to respect the fact that there are members that serve that are not from your particular faith background. Where you move from talking about your faith to proselytizing is when that other person sees that it's starting to be intrusive or abusive. So make sure that you understand where that line is to be drawn. It's going to be subjective to the people you're talking to, but essentially don't push your faith on other individuals. You can advertise your services, you can talk about your faith, but don't try to push it on people. 412, religious lay leaders must work through the RMT in order to publicize any religious service. So again, if you want to actually publicize, you want to advertise your service, make sure you are going through the chain of command so that you can have something signed off by the CO that, yes, this can be used to publicize the service. We can advertise in this way. 413, religious lay leaders are members of the command religious program, and as such must hold themselves in a high level of conduct and character as their actions reflect the program. We've hit on this a little bit earlier. Even when you're not offering your services, you are still a member of the command religious program. You are reflecting the command in your actions, so you're going to be held to a really high standard. Make sure you are maintaining that. All right, so the process. First step in the process of becoming a religious lay leader is the RMT identifies the need for a religious lay leader through the religious needs assessment or other means. So this step has been done. That's why you're here. 2, the RMT and unit leadership identifies a potential religious lay leader. That would be you. Again, this step has been completed. You're here doing this training because you have been identified as a potential religious lay leader. Appendix C, religious lay leader recommendation, is where you can get into that portion. So the next steps, now that we've completed those, this is all guided by Appendix A, which is a religious lay leader checklist. Each item in here needs to be checked off before you can officially be a religious lay leader. Step 3 is the command chaplain interviews the prospective religious lay leader. That's going to be Appendix B, the religious lay leader interview form. And then step 4, the chain of command makes their recommendation. So the command chaplain, after the interview, will actually write a letter of recommendation to the CO specifying that they think that you should be a religious lay leader, that they have determined that this is not going to interfere with your primary duties, that you are a sailor of good order and discipline, that you're going to be representing your faith group well, you're going to represent the command well. So we'll write a letter of recommendation to the CO to have them appoint you. And then step 4, the chain of command makes the recommendation. So verifying the prospective religious lay leader demonstrates the required leadership characteristics, that they have no history of misconduct or marginal performance, and they understand the need to maintain their primary duty. And then step 5, the member attends the religious lay leader CRP training. That's what you're doing right now, this training. Again, Appendix A, the religious lay leader checklist. You're going to check this off in there. Appendix E, the religious lay leader training CRP training standards. So we went over those with the chapters that Chaplain Reedy went over, and then also the items that I went over, all those numbered items, that those are actually going to be, when you contact us after this, we're going to send you out a pre-signed form with those specifying that you have been informed on those, that you understand those. So you're going to email Chaplain Reedy at reedysj@gmail.com. You should have a copy of this slideshow. You'll have that on hand. If you don't for some reason, again, you can go back on Facebook or YouTube. Facebook, it's NBSD Chapel. So facebook.com/NBSD Chapel Naval Chaplains. And then on YouTube, just search for NBSD Chapel because it's a really long, arbitrary number-letter combination, but you can find us on there. So you can view this again. You can get his email there. So reedysj@gmail.com. Send an email to him with your name, your rank, command, and religious organization, and then he'll provide you with those signed copies of the Annex E2 that has everything signed off that you've gone through those different numbered items. All right, so step 6, the member seeks authorization for the religious organization. You're actually going to reach out to your religious organization. Again, you need to make sure you're going to the proper channel of authority. For some of you, that may be your local congregation. For others, it could be at a larger level. If you have, say, a national office for your denomination, you're going to need to reach out to that level. So whoever it is that is the authorizing party within your denomination or your faith group, you're going to want to find out exactly who that is and reach out to them for authorization. Step 7 is your religious organization will endorse you to be considered to serve as a religious lay leader. So the RO is going to verify that you're in good standing within your faith tradition and you're of good moral character. They verify that you are authorized to assist in organizing or leading services, and they specify which sacraments, ordinances, rites, whatever that you are authorized to conduct, and then who you're authorized to conduct them for. Step 8 is the interviewing chaplain makes that written recommendation I was talking about earlier to the CO. So if you have a chaplain that's going to be writing this that isn't familiar with what that letter needs to look like, it is in the NTTP. It's Appendix F, the lay leader chaplain recommendation. They can use that as a template for writing this recommendation to the CO saying, yes, this person should serve as a religious lay leader within our command. And then step 9, the commanding officer signs a letter of appointment. Again, a lot of times COs don't know exactly what this letter needs to look like. It's going to be Appendix G in the NTTP, so they can see a template of what that should look like. Definitely want to put all these things through admin so that they can chop it, make it look pretty, do what yeomen do, and make it all uniform so that all these letters are in order, ready to go. So the commanding officer at that point will actually appoint you as a religious lay leader, again, for up to 1 year or for any specified time within that time. So the checklist and expectations, the religious lay leader planning checklist is going to be Appendix H. That one's very important to get done before you go in deployment so that everything is ready to go before you go. Appendix I is your religious lay leader program checklist, making sure that everything's in place. Appendix J is religious lay leader service checklist. K is the publicity checklist. L is the program feedback sheet. And then M is your lay leader report. That's going to be the one that you're typically going to be doing monthly with your chaplain that shows how the service has been going, how many you're offering, how many people are showing up. All right, so again, the most important references we have here, there are many that when you go to Annex E2, again, you'll see each of those line items has a different instruction that you're going to want to review for those things. But the most important references are this NTTP. So it's NTTP 1 TAC 05.1 Mike. There's also additional title for this. That's the same document, just the Marine Corps side, Navy Marine Corps. It's going to be MCRP 6 TAC 12 Bravo. and then Milpers Man 1730 TAC 010. Again, please review all those documents because they are very important. They'll go beyond what we're talking about today and give you a better understanding. So we'll go through the end of the slideshow, just some little humorous things we have. This is one of my favorite memes about Chaplain Corps is when Chaps is sick and RP2 does field services. So we have RP out there raising a sheep up. Everybody's worshiping that sheep. And a new one that I just saw today that Chaps Reedy put in here is how to summon a chief. Now, I think if you want a particular chief, you probably need their stained mug as opposed to the coffee pot that you just put in the center there and guarantee that chief's going to show up. Other way, you can just reach out to us on Facebook. Again, we're going to have this post on Facebook. Send us a message with any questions you have. We'd be happy to answer them. Reminder again to anybody that's watching this that was not actually part of this training, this doesn't qualify your PQS unless you're part of this. So if you want to actually get approved as religious lay leader, reach out to your chaplain. This may qualify as going through this training at that point once they can go over everything with you. But you need to actually be in touch with a chaplain and go through the rest of the process for this to qualify as your PQS.